Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel or listening to us, we are so very, very glad to have you. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined as always by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. What's going on, Josh?
How's it going, Will?
Yeah, it's going well. Thanks for asking. And today we are talking with Heather Cronk. She's a longtime community organizer and the founder of Project 2112, a new effort focused on connecting and organizing the roughly 15 million Americans who have left evangelical Christianity. After deconstructing herself from fundamentalist evangelicalism more than 20 years ago, she spent 2 decades working in progressive movement spaces. Through 2112, she's helping Exvangelicals find one another, tell their stories, and engage the public harm caused by powerful evangelical institutions while building healthier, more accountable forms of community and organizing. And we're just so glad to have you on the show, Heather. Welcome to Faithful Politics.
Thanks, Will. All of those things are true.
Awesome. I'm off to a good start.
That's a good start, yeah.
One fact check already done.
Yeah, I know. Which for our show, just an FYI and regular listeners, we normally have terrible times with people's last names. So I'm hoping I at least said your last name.
Mine doesn't make it easy, but you got it right.
Awesome. That's pretty cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about Heather. So you started this organization, Project 2112. We'll talk more about what it does and all the things you all are doing. But I'd love to just kind of get a better understanding of who is Heather Cronk. So I'm sure my bio intro, while correct, did not really fill in some of the gaps that kind of made you who you are and why you wanted to form this organization. So tell us about Heather.
Yeah, that feels like a super existential question early in the morning, but let's dig in. I grew up mostly in Kentucky. We kind of moved around the South a little bit. My dad worked for the Army. My mom was a preschool teacher. Moved around a little bit when I was in high school, but mostly in Kentucky. And my parents are Christian, but not evangelical. So I brought evangelicalism all upon myself of my own volition. And so when I was 13, I went to a summer Bible camp. I'm sure my parents sent me there just to get me out of their hair at some point in the summer, and got the hell scared out of me, like a lot of 13-year-olds do. Walked the aisle for Jesus, and got very deeply into a very fundamentalist evangelical form of Christianity. And so became a very deeply sanctimonious teenager and college student. Went to college at a small conservative school in the mountains of Georgia, and then went to seminary in North Carolina at Wake Forest Divinity. And that was really the first time that I was kind of in a community with people who were different than I was. So whether that was different theologically, first time being around folks of color, first time being around folks who were queer, first time being around folks who were older than I was. There was just a lot going on in that space, and my lived experience in that community didn't match up to the theology that I had been taught and very fervently adopted. And so I deconstructed when I was in divinity school, which, tale as old as time. That's not the first time that's happened. Figured out I was queer shortly after that. Not the first time that's happened. And so really kind of, after that experience, after leaving the kind of theology that I had been formed in and the kind of worldview that I had been formed in, kind of stumbled my way into the nonprofit sector, which is where I found organizing. And that for a former evangelical, organizing was like, made all the sense in the world. I was like, oh, I've been doing this my whole life. I just didn't call it this. And so, we can talk more about what that experience looked like, but that was really where I was like, oh, that all of these different pieces of myself are making sense and coming together.
Yeah, I really appreciate your story. I remember when I went to it was a seminary that was different. I went to actually 3 different seminaries. 2 of them were very conservative. One was not at all. It was very liberal. And I remember the experience of going to liberal seminary, and it was definitely like we're not in Kansas anymore kind of experience. We're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy kind of thing. When I went there, and it was a bit of culture shock for someone who had never really been exposed to that kind of stuff, like that kind of, like you said, theology, the diversity in theology. I remember when a friend of mine, who was a worship leader at the Methodist church, and he was gay, and I remember turning around and seeing him kissing his boyfriend at church, and I thought, this isn't the church I grew up in. This is a very different church than I grew up in. And it was a very formative thing to me. To me at the time, it really repelled me. And there's a lot of reasons why. I think if I went to a different kind of seminary today, I would just be much less shocked and much just, hey, let's just learn and figure out what we need to do to learn, and not be so worried about protecting all of my deeply held beliefs. Right. And I would just love for you to walk us through, and the audience through, like, what was the process of letting go some of these beliefs like? I have to imagine that was pretty painful, right? We talk about exvangelical as if like, hey, that's my ex there. Every time I see an evangelical, it's like looking at my ex or something like that. And maybe that is kind of how it is, but it's like, I don't know if that's Pollyannish, or I don't know exactly what it is, but it kind of feels like it's not, the label doesn't give justice to the process, maybe. And I'd love for you to just kind of walk through that pain, maybe, of having to let go of some of those things. If you did, if it was painful, I'm assuming, so I shouldn't assume.
Yeah, it was painful, and pain is relative, right?
Sure.
Because
maybe it was liberating too.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is because my parents weren't fundamentalist. I didn't go through I didn't lose my family in the same way as so many people. Like, I just can't even fathom how deeply hurtful that is, either to have to separate yourself in order to just, like, in the interest of self-preservation, or to be cast out. And so I am deeply, deeply grateful that I didn't have to endure that kind of pain. But of course, like, breaking your worldview is painful. It was
disorienting at a minimum, right?
Yeah, it was super disorienting. It was, I remember it was, 3 nights that I didn't sleep, and I was just like,
oh my word, yes,
like losing my, like, it really, really felt like I was losing my mind. And I kind of like had to go through that. This is bringing me back, like the refiner's fire.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up any really bad memories of that. But
no.
But like, I love that though, because that's real life though, isn't it? Like, totally. We go through something, and it's like it's this wrestling inside it. I mean, not just because I'm a pastor. It reminds me of like Jacob wrestling with God, Totally. And he's like, I'm not going to let go until you bless me. And then God blesses him, and then he's left with a permanent scar afterwards. And I kind of feel like that happens to all of us in some way when we go through those major transitions. Anyway, sorry, I jumped in when you're talking.
Yeah, no, I think the reality for me, and I think, in talking with so many evangelicals over the last, year and more, is that I think for a lot of people, there is a sort of dark night of the soul, right? Like, John of the Cross wasn't wrong, right? Like, there is a dark night of the soul that's like the marker, but it doesn't mean that once you come out on the other side, there's nothing else there, right? Like, a lot of ex-evangelicals will call themselves post-evangelical to kind of try to signify, like, this thing is I'm still marked, right? Like, this thing, I'm still working through. What are the tapes in my head, the scripts that I need to delete or edit, or, there's still all this stuff that you're trying to work through. And, 25 years later, there's certainly stuff that I'm still wrestling with, or pulling myself out of, or realizing, oh, that's a script from 30 years ago that I didn't realize was still rattling around in my head. So it's not a final process. It's it's ongoing.
So, like, what is Project 2112, and how have you been able to kind of use your experience of deconstructing to to help sort of color the mission of this organization that you're building?
Yeah. Yeah, so the project really started when I went back to Wake Forest for my, I'm old, so my 20-year class reunion a few years ago. And, I was literally like back in the classrooms where I had gone through that deconstruction process, back talking to some of the folks who had actually accompanied me through that process and thinking about it together 20 years later. And as I was doing that, I went through that process. I'm not so old that the internet didn't exist, but I am old enough that it was not I wasn't like going online to try to find other people who were going through this process, right? I was like using the internet to like buy a flight or check my email, and that was the extent of my internet usage 20 years ago. But going back to some of those conversations and both reflecting on that with other folks, having folks reflect back to me, oh, I remember this part of that process for you, made me think a lot about who else has gone through this process. What does that look like for them? How many other people had the benefit of doing that as part of a community, right? Like another thing I'm really, really grateful for. And so when I got home and now using the internet for all kinds of things, found Exvangelicals, right? Like found, super grateful to Blake Chastain, who kind of coined that term, both as a way to name the experience and also as a way for folks to be able to find each other, which hadn't happened before the hashtag. So when I started, looking online, it's like, oh, there's a whole world that I didn't know about. I didn't have any visibility into. And then when I started, I'm a nerd. And so I also started digging into like, how many people, this seems like a lot of people, how many people is this? The good folks at Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, have done a lot of research and started sharing that to say, actually, we can tell you how many people it is. It's 6% of the American population, which 6% of adults is about 15 million people. I was like, so then I started thinking about it as an organizer, and I was like, well, 15 million people, like, why are we?
That's quite the market.
Yeah. Why are we running around trying to change the minds of 10 Trump voters who maybe don't, maybe regret their vote? Like, there are 15 million people who are mostly not engaged in progressive organizing. At least that what I was finding. And so that's really where the project kind of started taking shape. Is I think there's a there. Let me have some conversations with folks to see, maybe this is just something that I want. And if so, fair, I'll go do something else. But if there's a way that I can help give some shape to this, both as someone who came out of evangelicalism and someone who has a lot of experience in organizing, maybe there's a way for me to help be a bridge with this community.
That's really informative, and I'm curious if you can kind of help explain, like, what is evangelicalism, if that's the right tense, or deconstruction, if the two are linked, and just like maybe some insight of, like, if somebody's listening to this and they're sitting there thinking about their faith, their church, their whatever, and they're just like, something just feels wrong, and it's hard to like put my finger on it. And most of the people that are deconstructing, when I have conversations with them, that's generally like what they say. It's like, well, like, what do you, like, why are you deconstructing? I don't know, and it's not like, they're following a fad, or they're particularly like connected. It's just like they've heard this word, it kind of connected a little bit with what they're feeling, and now they're trying to sort of unpack, like, what the heck is this thing inside of me that's making me not want to go to church, Mm-hmm. So I love for you to just kind of unpack, like, what is deconstruction and evangelicalism, and kind of talk about sort of like how people may be experiencing it and not know.
Yeah. I think that, deconstruction is a lot broader than being an evangelical. So being an evangelical just means you were raised in evangelicalism for some period of your life, and you no longer are evangelical. And that can look a whole bunch of different ways. That can look in a super high control, cultish religion, or it can look like you were in Young Life or a Campus Crusade or whatever, and you like emerged from that, less scarred than, than maybe other people. There are all kinds of, ways that folks can kind of define themselves. But being an evangelical is, you were an evangelical at some point, you're not an evangelical any longer. If you choose the identity, that's yours to choose. Deconstruction, I think, is a lot bigger and can apply beyond just evangelicalism, right? So you can grow up in a PCUSA or ELCA church and not be necessarily harmed by that experience, but still deconstruct the theology or maybe even the culture around it. And I think in both of those instances, evangelicals are actually very diverse in terms of where we kind of come out the other side of that process of kind of leaving evangelicalism. The data, again, I'll keep citing data because that's who I am as a human. PRRI's data says ex-evangelicals are actually split exactly in half, 49-51, between folks who still identify as Christian and people who do not identify as, or still identify as religious, and people who do not identify as religious. So just because you're an ex-evangelical doesn't mean that you're not Christian. Half of ex-evangelicals still are. But it does mean that you left an evangelical flavor of Christianity and have found a different, a lot of folks go to PCUSA or Unitarian or other kinds of, more open Christian congregations.
What's your sense on the 50% or so that are still Christians? Because like when I've spoken to, again, ex-evangelicals or deconstruction, and apologies if I'm confusing the two terms, but April LaJoy, Ryan Recker, even Sarah McCammon when we had her on, they're all believers still, and I remember asking like why, like why would you just still be in your faith despite all the other sort of ugliness? And that each of their answers were different, but all kind of revolved around like Jesus. Like Jesus is still who he says he is, kind of thing. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I emerged from evangelicalism agnostic. So, and I still very much identify as agnostic, but I'm still on the board of a church in Baltimore. Like I still like
Interesting.
The community is important, and I fell in love with a community whose theology I don't share. That's fine. It's actually for me an exercise and kind of like when I deconstructed theologically, but I still had a lot of fundamentalism I needed to deconstruct from. And so part of my exercise is continuing to deconstruct from fundamentalism, however that shows up. But there, one of the first people I talked to when I first started exploring, whether there was a there with this project, was a guy who's now become a friend, Tommy in Detroit, who used the line when he was describing his process, who used the line, "I followed Jesus out of fundamentalism." And I think that for a lot of folks, just because you want to deconstruct the fundamentalism doesn't mean that you want to give up on Jesus. And I really respect folks who come out in that place, who are like, just because this flavor of the church has decided to hold on so tightly to enact such fear around Jesus, doesn't mean that's the only way to think about him.
I really appreciate that. I have obviously, I say obviously as if like you know me that well, but I'm a pastor.
We're friends.
Yeah, like obviously how I'm going to answer this. I love Jesus. And it's funny because it's like when someone asks me, well, what do you mean you love Jesus? Like you've never met him. It's not like I've met him, like I've met you or Will, right? You're not, it's like you don't have conversations, what I think I do, but they're like not conversations, I guess, in the same way that obviously like we're talking in that same way. It's like, why do you love Jesus? And I think that's a really good question. And if I'm like even just trying to answer my own question on the spot, it's like, well, I've had an experience that I can't separate from identifying this with the Spirit of God in Jesus. And then I have the Gospels that I go back and, I can't prove that to anybody, but I don't think it was ever about proving like I don't know. I mean, how can I prove to someone that Jesus is real or that he existed or he did anything? We all have access to the same data. We can all look at the same arguments that everyone else does. I think at some level, it comes down to like the experience that you have. And that's a major, 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 contributing factor in all of our faith. And, hearing your story, I get so many different questions that come to my mind. And I think there's several, but the one I want to focus on right now is a sense of like, okay, the label. You have a label of exvangelical. I have a label of evangelical. Honestly, I don't even like the labels that much. I'm liking them less and less now because I'm learning as labels shift and you don't, then the label doesn't match you anymore. I'll give you a very clear example, i.e. what conservatism is felt like right now, and it's identified right now, meaning i.e. MAGA, I'm not conservative. If conservative means MAGA, then count me out. I'm not conservative. But I do love Jesus, and I do believe in the authority of the Bible, and I do believe, all those different things. You can go down the line, but it's like labels shift. And I guess I'm wondering, like, what's the pros and cons of this exvangelical label? How have you seen it used well? How have you seen it maybe used not so well, or used maybe too loosely or haphazardly? Does the question make sense?
Yeah.
I can rephrase or I can ask a different one if you don't want to answer that one.
No, it does. I'm
You can take your time. The amazing thing about this is we can take out pauses. It's amazing. You can take out pauses. So
don't take out the pause.
It looks like you went right away and just.
No. The pause is good. I mean, I think there are a couple things that come to mind. One thing, I had one of my conversations early on in this project. I was talking with someone who experienced a deep harm, deep trauma at the hands of the church. And so we were talking about the project, and she followed up later with some feedback, and part of the feedback was about the name of the project, right? It's a reference to Matthew 21:12, where Jesus walks into the temple, sees people being taken advantage of because they were poor and didn't have the money for sacrifice, couldn't change their money, and were being, exploited by folks who were offering to change their money for them. Flips over all the tables in the temple, and I think that that's actually a really important way to demonstrate. It's an important story. It's also an important way to demonstrate what the project is about, right? It's an insider walking in and flipping over the tables, not just an outsider.
Interesting.
And her feedback, part of her feedback was, look, I don't think that I can be part of something that references the Bible in the name. And I was like, fair enough. I think we have different strategies, right? Like, we don't have to agree on that.
Sure.
I understand and recognize and honor the trauma and the pain that you've experienced at the hands of the church, so much so that you can't actually be close to something that even references it. Whereas I think that, like, I don't want to let go of the tool, of the strategy of using scripture to actually call people out on the very ways that they're being hypocritical about it. That's fair enough. But, part of that is I think there is a strain of evangelicals who have experienced such harm at the hands of the church that can't even get close. And I don't judge them for doing that. I judge the church for exacting that level of harm. So that's I think one way that I wouldn't say that it's been misused, but that there's a stridency that I think is fair and is really unfortunate. I think the other thing, Josh, I appreciate you saying, like, I don't have a way to prove anything about Jesus. And, like, well, then your faith would be no good, right? Like, if you could prove it, you wouldn't need to have faith. And I think that's the part of where many more political, those who use evangelical as a political term and not a theological or a polity term, have squeezed the faith out of the faith, right? Like if everything is black and white and everything is certain and everything is fundamental and everything is concrete, why the heck do you need to have any faith? And so, I respect folks who are like, look, I still find something in Jesus because I don't feel like I'm willing to let go of the good things just because some folks have decided to run with the bad things. And I think of the same thing, like I sort of, at this point in my life, you didn't ask me this question, but I'll offer it anyway. At this point in my life, I sort of think about Jesus in the same way that I think about, in the same way that I think about ancestors, right? Whether those are my blood relative ancestors, or I often think about Bayard Rustin, one of the like smartest, most strategic organizers in American history. I will sometimes kind of think of like, oh God, if Bayard Rustin were thinking about this problem, where would he come out on it, right? And in the same way that people pray, like I don't pray to Bayard Rustin, but I like reflect on like if I were the best version of myself and striving to like invoke one of the smartest people I could think of, like how would that change how I'm moving right now? And so I think there are a lot of ways that folks can kind of move around in that gray space that maybe isn't like claiming a faith, but that is sort of positioning you inside the world.
I appreciate you telling that story about the way that the name of your organization affected them, because I feel to some degree that is kind of our story too, with Faithful Politics, because as a Democrat Republican duo, we have people on that I know repulse a lot of our audience. I know that because I get the emails and I respond to them nicely.
Yeah.
And it's like my sort of mission or goal is to normalize, like having views on our show that are very different than probably where the center of our audience sits. Just to kind of wrestle with that tension, and not yell or argue or anything like that. So like that's kind of our mission, is try to figure out like how do we strategize to normalize civil conversations? But for your organization, you're trying to work with evangelicals and deconstructionists. So somebody saying that they don't really like the name of your organization, in my mind, it seems like that's sort of like your target customer in a sense, right? Because you're like there's some trauma here that needs to kind of be worked through, because if even just a name of an organization that's intentionally trying to help folks that have had similar experiences, like if the name is triggering, then that's a good place to start. So I'd love to just kind of get your sense of like what can your organization do for like a person like the person you described?
Yeah, I'll clarify a couple of things. One is, I draw a pretty clear distinction between people who are sitting in the pews in evangelical churches who may or may not fully understand the ways in which many evangelical leaders are marching their congregations toward authoritarianism, and the evangelical leaders who are marching their congregations toward authoritarianism, right? So you mentioned Kevin Roberts before we, got on the air. I have no sympathy, nor do I feel like I need to build any empathy for Kevin Roberts, who is marching the country toward authoritarianism. He has made a choice. He is wielding power in a way that exacts that choice. And I think that that's deeply, deeply harmful and violent to millions of people. I don't have any use for that. I have a lot of sympathy and a lot of empathy for folks who are caught up in that system, caught up in those choices, who either may be looking for a way out and don't know how to find one, or who actually don't have any visibility into it because they've been raised in a system of Christian nationalism that they actually don't have eyes on, right? If you're swimming in the water, you can't see the water. So I think that's an important distinction to make, that I take power really seriously. Who has power, who doesn't have power, who's wielding power over people who don't have it. The other thing I'll say about Project 2112 is I'm not actually looking to like offer therapy to people. I'm not a therapist, I'm not a social worker. I am very eager for folks to find their way into those systems and structures and supports that can help folks find healing. And I have found for myself that one of the ways that I have moved through my deconstruction process and healing process is through organizing. It is through action. It is through changing the systems that are causing those power imbalances and violence and stress and anxiety. So the thing that Project 2112, we are unabashedly focused on connecting people. We are unabashedly focused on making exvangelicals more visible. But more than anything else, I think that part of the healing work is actually the organizing, is actually intervening in ways that we see evangelical leaders causing harm.
I really appreciate that. And I love anyone who's an organizer. I appreciate you because I stink at organizing. I'm so bad. I'm so unorganized by nature.
Oh, no. I learned organizing in evangelical church.
Well, I guess cleaning your house and having an organized workspace is different than organizing people, maybe. I mean, I can do it, but that's not really my question. But I appreciate, yeah. I mean, anything's possible.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you do that. This is because you're organizing people around this understanding of like a move out of authoritarianism, a move out of fundamentalism, right? From evangelicalism, those aspects of evangelicalism. I'm assuming, and you can correct me, I am going to get to the question, but I'm assuming it's not move out of Christianity or move away from Jesus. It's move out of this authoritarian, system that's been basically a house of cards built on top of this, real fundamental, because if they're really fundamentalist, then they probably love a lot more, because that's how Jesus was. He was pretty fundamental about that, loving everybody and going and hanging out with prostitutes and tax collectors and people that everyone else seemed to hate, and the religious elite. And that's really what got him killed, I think, in one of the big things that got him killed. And my question for you, and you can go as personal as you want, you can keep it as surface level as you want, whatever. But what do you think about Jesus, right? Because you left the system, which I totally respect, but then you also became agnostic. And I'm not saying you chose that, like I'm looking at my options right now and I just want to choose agnosticism. That seems like the one that fits my fancy right now. No, this was a deeply experiential, right? Learning from people, seeing things you've never seen before, realizing there's things that can happen, having questions given to you you've never asked before. And then through that process, you emerge. But what happened with Jesus there? And what do you feel about Jesus? Obviously, no judgment at all. I know I'm a pastor, but I'm not asking for any agenda except to know what your true, genuine thoughts are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I was worried what pastors thought, then I'd be a lot less vocal.
Then you would. That's true. I appreciate that. Yes.
I appreciate the caveat.
I need to take a little bit more of what you're doing, not care so much what pastors think.
Yeah, I mean, the identifying myself as agnostic for me is one of the ways that I am continuing to work on breaking fundamentalist tendencies, right? So again, like I said before, the theology broke before the kind of worldview broke. And so it's a way for me, agnosticism just says, I don't know, it's not for me if I were to just personally for myself, if I were to identify as atheist, that would be too fundamentalist, I think, for myself, too definitive, too black and white, too I know. So I prefer to actually keep myself as agnostic as a continuous challenge to break that for myself. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate stories about Jesus. That also doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the tenets of Stoicism, right? Like, I feel like I can kind of take lessons from from like multiple worldviews, multiple ideologies, and then kind of bring that into, what I'm learning and what I'm seeing and experiencing for myself. I've felt challenges about that, to be sure, right? Like when I was in seminary, one of the books we read, I think my first year, was a book called Shopping for Faith, about kind of the capitalism of church shopping, right? Like people looking for like, well, I want this piece and this piece and this piece, and how that, when you don't take the whole system, then you just cater it to whatever shape you want it to look like. And so that, like, I take that as a real challenge. Like, am I just taking the oranges from here and the bread from here and not actually adhering to a system? But for me, adhering to a system, I know my tendency is to fall into the fundamentalism. And so I've just made the choice. I'd rather be not fundamentalist than fundamentalist. And so I'd rather sit in the unknowing.
That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
What does actually organizing look like for the folks that you are working with? I mean, like kind of help paint a picture of like what's the day-to-day operation look like for you, meeting, talking, organizing, getting them to do stuff.
Yeah. I told someone the other day, it's the most old school organizing I've done probably in my life. It's a lot of one-on-ones with folks. It's a lot of 30-minute conversations, trying to identify somebody who resonates with the project, and then who do they know who also might resonate with the project. It is uncomfortably evangelical in its nature. I am actually recruiting, so it is uncomfortably evangelical to organize Exvangelicals.
Kind of like a missionary, like an exvangelical missionary of sorts.
Josh, you're not making it better. You're not making it better. It's a lot of one-on-ones. And then, what we're doing right now is, building a community of folks who identify as exvangelical and are interested in the project, interested in connecting and organizing. We're starting to do monthly community calls. So folks from wherever they live, they can hop on Zoom. We're going to do a monthly call. We'll have somebody tell their story. We'll have a conversation. It's really a chance for folks, regardless of where they live, to see other people, and almost more importantly, to be seen, to just like be seen as, who you fully are. And then we're working on setting up in-person IRL gatherings, meetups in communities where we can get a small group of exvangelicals to kind of connect together, and both to build relationships and also to identify where are the places where we might want to organize together. What are the ways in which our community is feeling pain at the hands of evangelical leaders, and how can we intervene on that? Who do we know? What do we know? One of the conversations I had early on was with someone who grew up evangelical in Southern California, in the kind of like Saddleback world, who said, exvangelicals have a decoder ring, but we just don't know what to do with it. And I was like, oh, great. I know what we can do with it. I just need all of the decoder rings. So it's, it's really like gathering people in local communities where folks can say, well, I know that this evangelical church is collaborating with this white supremacist group. How do we break that collaboration? How do we intervene in that? How do we make sure that church members actually know that that's happening, which is a thing that's really happening in the world? How do we, we know that trans youth in our community are being attacked right now by the school board. How do we step in? They may not have family members who are willing to stand in front of that violence and hatred. How do we do that? So we're in the midst of building out those in-person gatherings. We have one coming up this month in Portland, Oregon. We have one coming up in the DC area. We have one next month in Raleigh, in North Carolina. And then about a dozen others of people who are kind of popping up in ones and twos and threes. And we're just trying to connect them together and then see what happens. But we're really trying to move toward the in-person gathering where folks can actually get together and figure out, how do we connect together? What do we want to organize around? And then how do we, Adrienne Marie Brown's line is, how do we move at the speed of trust to get from point A to point B?
That's great. And for our audience members that might be older than I am, you said earlier IRL, which means in real life. For those wondering, because I've got a couple of
Indeed.
little kids that speak in like BRB terms all the time. Like, all right,
AFK.
AFK, But the majority of the people that you work with, are they all progressives or Democrat leaning, or is it sort of like a mix?
I mean, I think that most of the folks who are in, part of the community now tend to lean more progressive. I think it's partially because that's where I lean. And so, part of this is like my worldview is to some extent shaping the project, which I'm conscious of. And it's also like that. Those are the folks who are most eager, most aware of the harm that's happening, and most eager to interrupt it. So it's not exclusive to folks who identify as progressive. In fact, part of what I'm doing is meeting up with people who, currently work for pretty far right Christian colleges and who want out of that and don't know how to do that. They wouldn't identify as progressive, but they know that what they're doing is not helpful. In fact, probably harmful, and they want out of that system. So it's, I think the organizing is going to look progressive, but the people, I think, are going to eventually be all over the place.
Are the reasons people kind of turning to exvangelicalism or even deconstructing, like, are the reasons kind of all the same, or do they vary? And then if they do vary, do they tend to vary by political affiliation?
Oh, Will, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. We know the answer to this question because PRRI has data about it. So there are a couple of things. They have data on why people leave, and they have data on how people identify in terms of ideology and partisanship, which I am fascinated by. So for the reasons why people leave, the top reason is I no longer agree with the theology of the church. Okay, that makes sense. Like, of course, I'd be surprised if that wasn't 100%. It's not 100%, but it's high. But the second most cited reason why people leave the evangelical church is the evangelical church's treatment of LGBTQ people, which was part of my experience. But then when I started having conversations with folks at the beginning of the project, I was stunned by how often that came up. Like, I was very surprised. And then I saw the PRI data. I was like, oh, well, I have it anecdotally, and I have qualitative and quantitative data.
I'm affirmed. Finally.
I'm affirmed. It's so dominant in the reasons, and it doesn't mean that that's the only reason, right? Like, they had people cite multiple reasons why. I think the third, if I'm remembering correctly, I think the third most cited reason was for my mental health. So like, there are a lot of reasons why, but when I saw the evangelical church's treatment of LGBTQ people, I was like, oh, that's an organizing question, or that's a political question. It's not just an individual, I no longer agree with the theology. It's, I'm looking at a system that isn't treating people well, or isn't living up to the standard that I thought that we were operating under. And so that I find that really fascinating. On the ideology and partisanship question, so PRI's data separates that out into two questions. And the numbers aren't this even, but on both of those questions, folks are roughly in pretty even thirds. So on ideology, exvangelicals are kind of ish numbers, a third conservative, a third moderate, a third liberal. On partisanship, a third Republican, a third independent, a third Democratic. My hunch, with my anecdotal data, with my qualitative data, my hunch is that those folks who are moderate or independent are actually probably progressive, but are so turned off by identifying with an institution or an individual or a leader or a worldview. They're so turned off by that they're just like, I'm none of the above, right? Like, I'm just in the middle. I'm just here trying to navigate my way through. So my hunch is that if you look at the 15 million exvangelicals across the country, probably 10 million of them are more to the left, like center left. And then a third of them, about 5 million, are probably center right. It doesn't mean that people stay in those categories, but that's my read on like what the data says, and then what my experience tells me about the data.
Yeah, I'm not very surprised by that, and yet I'm asking myself the question: why am I not surprised by it? You know, in terms of like, what is it about evangelicalism that people are like? Well, you just said, I mean, that was the big thing, right? This treatment of LGBTQ. And I actually would like to push into that a little bit more and dial down on that. So this has been something that I've been wrestling with quite a bit, right? So I'm not LGBTQ. I'm not in that community. I've never had those kinds of like feelings, attractions, the things that, you know, the mental model inside that's happening. I've never experienced that. And so just acknowledging that from the beginning, like there's a significant ignorance that I have, even speaking on this topic, because I don't know what it's like to live day in and day out with this reality, right? And so I want to just like automatically say that from the beginning. And, you know, I've been wrestling a lot because I also like understanding that I take like most people would say, this is a traditional view of marriage, traditional view of what the scriptures say about this. We've talked to several people. Let's see, Matthew Vines. We had him on. Brandon, what's his name, dude? Come on. Do you remember, Will?
Robertson.
Yes, Brandon Robertson. I'm so sorry.
And Preston Sprinkle.
We've had him on. We've been talking about this. And my views have shifted quite a bit in the sense that, you know, I would come down to what probably most people would say, this is a traditional view of what the scripture teaches on this. And yet I definitely make a distinction between the church and the society. The church and how theology should operate in the church, and then what that means in a pluralistic society. And some of the arguments today and some of the things I see completely ignore, I think, this idea that, guys, the cat is out of the bag and we live in a pluralistic society. So like coming in and trying to say that people need to go back to what they were doing, number one, it's wrong. Number two, it's not going to work. People aren't going to do that. They're going to fight against that. And you should expect that. And I'm looking at this situation that we're in, and I'm just brokenhearted about it. But at the same time, I'm trying to wrestle with how do I become a partner, right, with my LGBTQ brethren, brothers and sisters. I have people in my family that are in that community. And so like, I have to love them. And I mean, loving is an imperative from Jesus anyway, but it's like, I have to love them. But I have not become convinced of the biblical argument. And I can't make myself be convinced. You know, it's kind of like what you're saying, like, you know, when I was trying to allude to, like, you became agnostic, but I'm assuming you didn't just choose it because you looked at all the different things. This seemed most convenient for you at this time. No, this is a deeply personal wrestling match that you had. And I'm going through the same thing, I'll be honest, with the LGBTQ issues, because compassion on the one side, it's huge for me. And I'm like, gosh, I understand what it's like to struggle with something that you just can't get rid of. It's like, no matter how much you pray, no matter how much you work, it doesn't go away. It's there. And so you're like, this must just be a part of who I am. And that's not even something as fundamental as my sense of sexuality and self. So I can, like, that is so hard. And it's like, I know I'm taking a long time with this, and I'm sorry. I'm just trying. I feel like I'm struggling every time I talk about this, try to get it out. I appreciate your patience and letting me do this. But what would you recommend to me? Someone who wants to be a partner with the evangelicals, who cares about people, who hates the people who have been hurt by the church. And yet I am very, like, I do have a very, my view of theology and my interpretation of scripture, many people may find reprehensible. Mm. And so, but I don't know how to change my view of scripture. Like, see, like I could say something, but that would be violating my conscience if I wasn't true what I really thought the scriptures were saying. Mm. So anyway, I'm not here to argue about what the scriptures are saying. Certainly willing to talk about that, but it's more, what do you recommend for me as someone who's kind of on the outside? I don't feel evangelical in the way it's currently being done right now, but I don't feel like I love Jesus. I believe in the authority of the Bible. I believe in its truth, like all those things. Like, I feel like the evangelicals left me. I haven't left them. So the question is, like, what would you say to me, I guess, in this moment, like wrestling through this? How can I partner? Like, can I partner? Is there space for me in these places circles where you are, where I wouldn't have the same view theologically, but I would be willing to step in and care and love and all that stuff. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing where you are, honestly.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I mean, I think that's really hard. And I think the more that we can share how and where and why we're wrestling, I just think that's the only way forward. So I appreciate you sharing where you are. And I think that, and I won't beat around that it's hard to hear at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sorry.
Which doesn't require an apology, just also requires me being honest about
that makes sense. That makes sense.
So I think that as long as we can both say, you're saying that you're wrestling and I'm saying it's hard to hear and I'm wrestling with that, I think that's a fair place to be. I think I'm not a biblical scholar. I did take
2
semesters of New Testament and some Greek and Hebrew. But I think the thing that one of the places where I've come out on the Bible is you can believe that the Bible is an effort for God to communicate without holding so tightly to the way that it was communicated that it becomes a weapon. Right? I would wager that there are probably other things that are taught over the course of the Bible, even just taking the New Testament, that you don't still think should be implemented in modern society. Right? As
understood at the time. Absolutely. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, we can argue about what the Bible actually says about queer people.
Sure. There's plenty out there for people to engage in, right?
Happy to have that conversation, but man, other people have done that much more beautifully and thoroughly than I can. We can talk about the way that, the word homosexuality was added into the Bible less than 100 years ago, right? Like, that was not originally.
It wasn't even a concept at the time in the way we think of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the pros and cons of loving and hurting, and where kind of, when we take full measure of Jesus, where do we think Jesus would come out on that question, right? So I think that there's space for folks who are honestly wrestling. I would like to think that there's, space in this project. I'd like to think there's space in the progressive movement. I know I have one of the things that I often say is, I didn't leave the purity culture of evangelicalism for a purity culture in progressivism, right? Like, I have no interest in maintaining a purity culture of any kind. And I think that progressives are, I've seen a lot of folks in the movement, and myself included, right, are trying to break free of what are the ways in which we went so far on the other side of a purity culture that we're the ones now who are being exclusive. We're the ones now who are keeping people out. Now, I'll caveat that to say, I do think that if you say you love people, you got to love all of them. Right? Like,
I agree.
Right? You can't pick and choose the Bible. You can't pick and choose theology, right? And you can't pick and choose inside people, inside humans, right? So there is something around like, do I love you conditionally, or do I love you unconditionally? And also, like, on the balance, where did Jesus come out on that? And I think inside the progressive movement, like, there's a lot of work that we need to do around the purity culture that we have created. And I would not hold up the purity culture, the fundamentalism inside evangelical churches as equal to the purity culture and fundamentalism inside progressive movement. Those are different things, right? Like the purity culture of like, you got to use the right pronouns is not the same as the purity culture of we want you dead. Those are not the same. And so, you know, when you're talking to, you know, whether or not I get married does not, you know, fundamentally mean, I mean, for some people that's life and death because that's access to healthcare and, you know, all kinds of other things. But, you know, when evangelical leaders are saying trans kids cannot have access to gender affirming care, that's a life and death question that I feel like Jesus was real clear about, you know? So again, it's like on the balance, Jesus didn't say anything about gender affirming care. He didn't say anything about abortion. He didn't say anything about gay marriage. But when you take the whole of Jesus's ethos, do you think that he comes out on the side of loving people fully and unconditionally or not? And I feel like, aside from my theology, I feel pretty clear where he ended up.
Yeah. So my last question for you, assuming we still have a country 5 years from now.
I love your optimism, Will.
and also assuming that Project 2012 is successful, which I don't have any reason to believe that it wouldn't be. Like what changes would you like to see in kind of the national conversation around exvangelicals and, you know, like just support for this group of folks?
Yeah.
Just give us some long range vision, assuming that we're not in Trump's third term.
Yeah. Well, from your mouth to whoever can hear its ears. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think about that in terms of, you know, in terms of numbers for how we're trying to build. You know, I don't have any, I'm not so delusional that I think that we're going to organize all 15 million evangelicals, right? But if we can get to 1 or 2% who are actively organizing with us, you know, 1% is 150,000 people. That makes a difference.
That's great.
In a lot of places, right? So I'm not trying to get us to the place. We're not growing by petitions. We're not buying lists. You know, we're, you know, with the ethos of moving at the speed of trust. If we had 1% of evangelicals actively engaged in campaigns in 5 years, I'd be real happy with that. I think the bigger question, and I'm just going to keep going back to data because that's who I am. One of the things that I am obsessed with is the way that white evangelicals who have wedded themselves to Christian nationalism have created the impression of widespread adoption and power. And actually, when you look at the numbers, there are only twice as many white evangelicals as there are exvangelicals. Say it again. There are only twice as many white evangelicals as there are exvangelicals.
It's amazing.
Part of what I'm thinking about for the next 5 years is, how do we pierce that idea of inevitability? How do we pierce the idea that it's inevitable that this country is going to be an authoritarian, Christian supremacist, Christian nationalist autocracy, right? Because there are a lot of people who are like, God, it kind of seems like we're up a creek. Like, I don't even know how we get out of this. And look, I don't know how we get out of this either, but I know how we don't get out of it, and it's not to do anything. So if I'm looking at the next 5 years, one of my hopes is that we do that connection enough, that we've built enough trust with folks, that we actually really take that visibility piece seriously and say, it's not because I want to be going on podcasts all the time. I don't. Y'all are great. But this is like my nightmare, is doing podcasts. But it's so important to say this is not inevitable. One of my favorite quotes, I'm considering getting it as a tattoo, but I have not done that yet.
Nice.
But one of my favorite quotes is from the guy who runs TED Talks, Chris Anderson. And his line is, "The future is not yet written. Pick up your pen." And I think about that a lot in terms of where we're going as a country, who has the ability to make choices about it, and how we present those choices. And so my hope is that we can mobilize enough people who are really committed to picking up their pens and saying, actually, the future is not inevitable, and we're going to write a different future for ourselves. That's my hope.
That's my hope too. And I really like that. I'm going to share that hope. Although I'm not sure if I'm going to get the tattoo. I've never gotten a tattoo, and I'm 40. So, well, there you go. We'll have to find a place in between wherever you are, wherever I am.
That will be great on a YouTube live stream. Just hear me out. A progressive and conservative pastor get a tattoo together at the same.
Yes. That would be interesting.
Here's where we meet.
There you go. I love it. Well, man, Heather, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the program. How can people get involved? This is your time to sell yourself in the organization. Let them know how they can get involved and be a part.
I mean, this is my nightmare as well, right? Like, this is the place where I'm the most evangelical about exvangelicalism. I mean, the place to plug into the work is project2112.org. So project2112.org. That's where folks can sign up for the email list. We let folks know when there are community calls happening, that you can join from anywhere, when there are in-person gatherings happening. It's also how I'm finding people and doing one-on-ones and finding out what do you want to be doing? What does this look like in your community? And then helping folks find each other. I just connected 2 people yesterday who are in Minneapolis and don't know each other and could benefit from being together. There's a little group of 4 people in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who didn't know each other, who are all evangelicals, who are connected now.
Nice.
So we're trying to do that as people join the list as well.
Well, that's great. Little small groups. You can join a little. Josh, not all of them are like that. Come on, somebody. Hey, you can even have. It's not a Bible study. It's what kind of study? It's a study into one of the people that did good things.
Look, evangelicals.
A Baird. What was his name?
Baird Rustin small group.
Baird Rustin small group.
Look, evangelicals got it right with small groups.
Hey, here's the reality, though, dude. It is true. I mean, here's the thing. It's like, if you just because you use propaganda doesn't mean you're a Nazi. Everyone uses propaganda, right? That's what we do. You use what works. Jesus and the early followers kind of figured out what worked in terms of community organizing. So it's okay to borrow it. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Heather. It's been a pleasure. And we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and I'll be looking for that tattoo with you, Josh.
Very good. And to our viewers and listeners, guys, thanks for being here. If you're still here, you've subscribed, so thank you. Now ask someone else to do it. Send it to someone else. Be annoying. This needs to grow so that we don't fall to authoritarianism, fascism, communism, all the isms that none of us want to fall to.
You have to
evangelicalism.
Yeah, this show, you have to evangelize this show.
Yes, you must evangelize this show. All right, guys. Hey, until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. We'll see you then.